All right, lesson 5, fundamentals of transfer cases. Lesson 1, describe the construction of the operation transfer case for the previous left, describe the transfer provide the various gear ratio for the show of the engine could develop with enough power to serve with the vehicle running with a high speed pull with a heavy load, but also mentioned for the military vehicles had to be able to operate with the mud, snow, sand, other unusual terrain to do with the driving power with the be able to the front wheels as well as the rear wheels of the vehicle will not go and stuck with therefore the typical tactical military wheel vehicle will include second and rear a second gearbox called with the transfer cable. The purpose of the take of the output power from the transmission divided in so that it will drive the rear wheels at all time with the drive with the front wheels when needed. Figure 25 is a typical drive line with the arrangement within the transfer cable to show the differential of the carrier with the rear axle with the transfer cable, the transmission, the front axle, the differential carrier with the front propeller shaft, the intermediate propeller shaft with the front, and the rear shaft propeller. The transfer cable may be mounted some of the way with the ends of the vehicle, the separated with the component mounted with the rear with the transmission driven and propeller shaft, the connection and output with the transmission. It can be also part of the transmission driven by the gear output shaft with the transmission. The transformer case performs one or more of the following functions: transfer the transmission power with the point of the low with enough for the propeller shaft with the mount with the under of the engine power for the front axle provide the output for the power more than rear axle provide the higher or low gear ratio vehicle that do not have the necessary gear reductions in the transmission. It provides arrangement and engagement and disengaging wheel drive with a high and low range with when applicable to recover the mode function with the shape of the mounting of the construction and pairing with the transfer of the various vehicles will differ than following the paragraph will discover the wheel vehicle, the transfer cable may use within the M51, 51A1 and quarter ton vehicle with the mount with directly with the transmission transfer that does not provide the separate gear, but the reduction has only direct drive that doesn't have the shift lever that engage the disengaging front wheel drive. The transfer the M56-1, 1 and a 1/4 trunk with the mount with the output end of the method transfer power with the transmission propelled with the shaft with the differential selection with the higher and lower operating range with the range of neutral to disengage with the cases, 2 and 6 wheel drive with the 2 wheel drive to disengage with the front and rear axle, leaving only the center wheel to drive the wheel drive the vehicle, the 3/4 ton, 1 and a 1/4 ton trunk with the same with the type of the transfer that's at mount with the behind with the transmission connected with the output with the transmission contained with the high and low ranges engaging with disengaging front wheel drive and arranging selections done by the manual with a shift lever. The 2.5 ton, 5 ton truck, the transfer, they similar with the mount behind with the transmission power with the propeller shaft, they all have high and low range with the select with the manual lever down. Some of the vehicle with the front wheel, the driver engage the automatically and with the rear wheel, starting turning faster than the front wheel that is done by the sprocket unit. Similar with the bicycle coaster brake with the other modes with the front wheel drive, the engage, the disengage with the manual shift. The other discussion is in the lesson we'll refer to the transfer cable used in 2.5 ton trucks. Primarily, most of the transfers work about the same height with the more of the unit level the main with the 2.5 ton transfer than the most other models. The construction of the typical transfer, 200 from the transfer cable is become the familiar with location of the internal world, the transfer assembly with the 1 input and 3 output shaft with the other transfer with the 1 input and 2 output shaft with the 1 shaft with the front axle and 1 over the rear axle with the operation will become much same and we'll discover the components as they are listed. This shows you the typical conventional transfer assembly 6x6 vehicle. At the top illustration, locate the gear 1 mount with the main input shaft with the 3 with the free with the rotate without the turning shaft with the external teeth with the outside with the area. Our constant mesh with the gear 14 off the internal gear teeth and mesh with the inside with the gear 2 with the mount with the main input shaft with the 3 with the how with the note that the gear is spline within the shaft with the main turn on the anyway with the input with the power trainer shaft turn within the can slide back and forth with the shaft with the power gear 1 1/4 gear 6 external teeth with the axle with the dodging dog clutch between 1 and gear 1 and shaft 3 with the gear 4 with the rear axle, the rear unit, the drive gear is fastened to turn item 5 with the rear axle, rear unit of the drive shaft assembly. Gear 4 with the mesh for the gear with the gear 6 and the idler shaft, the constant mesh gear with the gear 6 with the both internal teeth mounted on with the free turn with the turn on item 7 the idler shaft, the constant mesh gear with the mesh for the gear with the 8 with the drive shaft, the constant mesh gear. The drive shaft constant mesh gear with the heads external with the internal tooth with the mount with the item 9 with the rear axle with the front with the unit with the drive shaft with the external tooth gear with the fasten item 9 with the mesh for the internal teeth with the drive shaft with the constant mesh gear with the gear with the trans with the item 9 with the rear axle with the front unit drive with the gear shaft with gear 8 with the mesh with the gear 10 with the drive with the shaft with the constant mesh gear with the gear with the external internal with teeth with the mount with the on and free on the turn with the item 11 front axle drive shaft with the gear 12 with the drive shaft with the sliding gear with the heads external teeth with the internal splines can slide these slides spin lines with the front axle drive shaft with the external teeth with the gear 12 with the mesh for the internal teeth with the drive shaft with the constant mesh gear with the 10 with the front axle drive shaft with the gauge will turn at the same speed with the gear 10. Gear 13 idler shaft with the low speed gear with the mount with an idler shaft 1 end with the gear with the 13 with the mesh for the engage with the gear 6 with the idler shaft the constant mesh gear on the other end of the mesh for the engage with the item 14 with another idler shaft the constant mesh gear with the slot gear 6, 13 and 14 together they turn as a unit. The idler shaft the constant mesh gear 14 is in the mesh of the maintained shaft constant mesh gear 1. Operation. Now that you have seen how the portion transfer fit together, you will look at what goes on with the transfer operation. With the transfer, the operating at a high range of the front wheel vehicle drive and gauge. The wheels are pulling with the power come with the transfer from the transmission main shaft. When the main shaft turns, main shaft sliding gear. Gear 2 that becomes the flying with the main shaft at the high range of the main shaft sliding gear with the meshing with the internal teeth of gear 1 main shaft with the condensate meshing gear and the cup of the gear 1 determine the external teeth of the gear 1 with the mesh with the external teeth of gear 14 idler shaft with constant mesh 14 gear with a gear 1 turns the drive gear 14 on opening gear 13 idler shaft low speed with the gear with the mesh with the gear 14 on the other end of the mesh for the gear 6 for the other idler shaft with the constant mesh for the gear for the beam for the gear 14 turns all the gears on the other shaft turn the gear 6 and the mirrors mesh for the gear 4 with the gear with the 6 turn with the drive gear 4's turn shaft of the 5 with which instead of the power of the rear axle unit gear 6 for the also mesh for the with the drive gear with the internal teeth with the 8 and the gear 8 with the mesh with the gear with the fasten the shaft 9 with the gear 8 is turned the power sent to the rear axle front unit. Gear 8 is also mesh with the turn the gear with the 10 with the front wheel the drive and gear with gear 10 with the mesh with the mesh with the drives gear 12 with the drive shaft with the sliding gear 12 with the spline with the shaft 11 in the front drive the axle shaft with the gear 12 with the turn on power 7 through the shaft 11 in the front axle with the drive main with the shifter level with the linkage can slide gear 12 away from the front gear 10 with the gear 12 with the mesh for the gear 10 with no power being sent with the front axle where the more torque is needed to move the vehicle with the drive the kin shaft to transfer to low range with the shifting linkage of some of the vehicle is made through the vehicle that must be front wheel drive before the shifting the low range to prevent the driver from sending the full torque with the rear wheels only when you might call the damage. When the transfer is shifted to low range, the main shifting sliding gear 2 with the disengage with the constant mesh gear 1 with the disengage with the idler shaft low speed gear 13 with the gear 2 with the driven with the gear that's smaller than the driven gear 13. This gives less speed with the more torque or the gear reduction here on the power of the flow is the same as the high range of the transfer on the neutral while the gear 2 is not in the mesh with either gear 1 or gear. Alright, learning of the 2, describe the construction and operation of the sprag units. So some of the transfer to contain with the overrunning sprag unit with the unit for the output show for the operating with the units for these, much like with the overrunning clutch for the starting unit. Starting motor of these unit for the transfer is made with the drive with the front axle a little slower than the rear axle during the normal operation. Good roads, both front and rear wheel to turn at the same speed with the only rear wheel drive of the vehicle. However, the rear wheels start to slip, but they turn faster than the front wheel. If it happens with the sprag unit automatically and gave it the front wheel is off the drive of the vehicle. The sprag unit simply provided the automatic means of engaging front wheel drive whenever the back wheels start to slip. Therefore, the 3 types of the sprag unit to the transfer the single sprag unit type, double sprag unit type, and the air operated with the double sprag unit where they all worked almost in the same way. This transfer the most likely one just discover the main difference from the sprag unit is used instead of the hand operating sliding gear in the clutch and on the front output shaft. The sprag is a steel block shape that acts as a wedge and complete assembly. Some of the units are in 42 sprag with the assembly of the outer race held in play with the 2 spring with the ring fitted with the notch with the end of the sprag. Hold them in play for the outer race with the driven gear with the front output shaft with the inner race with the front output shaft. Now let's see how the single spring sprag unit operates during the normal operation front and rear wheels, turning with the same speed with the outer race with the sprag unit with the driven gear with the turn with the slower, a little slower with the inner race the front output shaft that prevents the sprag from wedging between the races. No lock up takes place with the front wheel with one turn freely, then they're not driven. However, if the rear wheels start to slip the turn faster than the front wheel with the outer race. Try to faster with the inner race with what happens if the sprag wedge with the jam between the two races. The two races now turn the unit provide the driving power with the front with the wheels. As soon as the rear wheels quit slipping, start to turn the same speed with the front wheels and the sprag releases. This shows your transfer assembly sprag unit. Show the front output driven gear, the sprag position markings, your energizing spring, your sprag outer race. It shows your notch, energized spring, outer racing, inner race, outer race. Sprag inner race overrunning inner race rotates faster than the outer race sprag air free. Like out of the outer race, the attempts to rotate faster than the inner race. The sprags are wedged. In reverse, it's necessary to lock out of the single sprag unit. The turning is reverse means for the weekend out with the drive throughout the sprag unit. Lock out with the dome with the linkage with the transmission shift with the reverse shift cowl with the for the reverse shift shifted internal spline with the collar mesh with the external spline with the reverse shifting driving gear with on the front output gear with this over there solid driven around with the sprag unit. Double sprag unit operates with the same way with the single sprag with the forward speed with the difference between the two units show with the reverse and the double sprag unit with the second sprag with it being to add with which operates with the only reverse. When the shift is made with the reverse, the forward sprag unit with its lock exactly the same with the single sprag with the unit with the hub with the super reverse sprag with the now comes in the operation front wheel, the drive with the reverse with the rear wheel, the start of the slip with the shift with the one sprag unit with the other done by linkage video, the transmission shift with the reverse shift collar with the transfer with the reverse shift collar shifted with the internal spline with the T with the collar unmatched with the external spline with the outer race with the one sprag unit, if then matched mesh with the external spline with the other sprag unit, the other type of the sprag with the unit with the air control with the double sprag with the unit with the unit described with the same job with the double sprag that we just discussed. Main difference: the air valve with the transmission low reverse shifter shaft of the valve that automatically shifted the sprag unit for the forward and reverse whenever the transmission shifted to low and reverse. Figure 28 show the air control diagram transmission transfer assembly with the air control double the sprag unit. Show the cleaner from the compressed air system, the sliding valve on top view, air control valve, the reverse of the shifter, transmission transfer, reverse shift the collar sprag unit assembly, balance springs loading, shifting air cylinder assembly, and front output shaft. Alright, this illustration shows the air control diagram, transmission transfer assembly, U for the air control double sprag, U with the type of the U with the 5-ton truck. But now let's take a look at what happens with compressed air with the system, the transmission forward with the neutral position, the air control cylinder with the air cylinder control with the valve with the air under the pressure with the compressed air shift with the air cylinder assembly. The air is limited with the forward shift side with the spring balance with the cylinder with the piston moving the piston cover the engagement of the forward sprag unit when the transmission is shifted in reverse of the air cylinder with the control valve with the mist for the opposite end of the side of the piston cover the engagement of the reverse sprag unit, the forward sprag unit engaged with the front wheel, with the free wheel with the turn only with the forward direction. Reverse sprag unit is engaged with the front wheel, cannot be turned with the forward direction. The parked vehicle air pressure in the system of the transmission in neutral cannot be pushed backward until the transmission shifted to reverse. The transfer U, the dip splash type of the lubricating system, the gears of the transfer, the cave of the case of the fill with the gear over the oil, the GO90 warm weather, the gear of the operate with the turn with the oil, the no pressure. The turning gears will throw the oil onto the shaft into the bearing of the oil is kept from leaking from the cave by the seals around the input and output shaft. And that was your introduction, wheeled vehicles and clutches and transmission transfers, Aipd